I remember seeing the movie Canadian Bacon in the Comedy Central listing way back when I was like 13 or 14 or so. I never actually watched it, I just kind of remember seeing the name. I remember it being a bit of a staple of Comedy Central programming on like Tuesday afternoons that one particular summer vacation, so I knew it existed, but I never really watched it. And I found it on Pluto TV recently and kind of had that thought of, hey, I remember this title. I never actually saw this movie. I wonder if it's any good. So I ended up watching it. And I instantly regret that decision. The year is 1995. The Soviet Union has long since collapsed. America is at peace. There's nobody to fight. And as a result, all the factories are closing and hundreds of thousands of Americans are finding themselves without jobs. Desperately trying to figure out a way around this, the president decides to do the logical thing, find a new person to pick a fight with. And wouldn't you know it, Canada ends up being the target, thus beginning Operation Canadian Bacon.
Get it?
I feel like this movie is ahead of its time while simultaneously a product of its time. It's ahead of its time because it's making interesting commentary on the American empire and the industrial war complex, whose only goal in life is to basically keep the war machine going by picking fights with random countries that may or may not even deserve to be messed with, you know what I'm saying? Like, these people profiteer off of war and misery and constantly look for reasons to bomb countries, no matter how minuscule, even going as far as to fabricating complete and total lies. And on the other hand, the movie is a product of its time because it's a shitty 90s comedy. And it's really disappointing because John Candy deserved a much better movie than this, seriously. You know, as long as we're talking about the two hands here, I feel like I'm watching two completely different movies. You know, movie A feels like a weird sort of heavy-handed commentary on American war, profiteering, etc. While movie B just feels like a really dumb 90s comedy that just goes through the motions. And there is some interlap between the two, particularly the propaganda being force-fed to movie B via movie A is basically the reason that John Candy and his crew from movie B are going to the Canadian border and all the wacky hijinks are ensuing. And as a result of the fact that I'm looking at almost basically two different movies, I just feel like this movie really would have worked better if they had just picked a side and stuck with it. I mean, is this like some sort of like satirical documentary kind of thing about the American empire? Or is it just John Candy and his merry band of dipshits who saw a documentary and just, we need to go to war with Canada? Why? Because shut up and laugh, dipshit! Honestly, as in terms of what movie A is trying to give us, I just genuinely felt like I was being preached to. I felt this message was very heavy-handed in all the wrong ways. And in the case of movie B, I laughed a grand total of once. And that was during the whole Canadian beer sucks riot that happened during that hockey game somewhere around the beginning. This movie is bad, but it's like spectacle bad, like Tommy Wiseau's The Room kind of bad. Like, it takes a very special level of incompetence to make a movie like this. I found myself wondering who made this movie, because this right here is something that is just, this needs to be beheld in order to be believed. Who made this movie, I ask? So I looked it up and, oh dear God, it's Michael Moore. So for the few people in the audience who are wondering who's Michael Moore, well, you know, I want to refer to him as the liberal Rush Limbaugh, except, do any of you guys even know who Rush Limbaugh is here in the modern day? I mean, he was a really big deal in the 90s, around the same time Michael Moore was a big deal, and most of the 2000s too. But here in 2019, you don't really hear much from that guy anymore. I know for a fact that he technically still has a show on Kansas City radio here. Like, one talk radio station still plays his show, but it's not nearly as relevant as some of the figureheads on Fox or Blaze TV or Breitbart or one of those other outlets, you know. He's doesn't really seem all that relevant anymore. So I'm trying to think of a good equivalent for the left, and I'm not really coming up with any names outside of maybe like Tucker Carlson. I don't know. But basically what you need to know is Michael Moore is ultra left-wing to the point where I'm almost embarrassed to admit I vote Democrat every now and then. It's just... If that doesn't do a really good description of who Michael Moore is, I refer you to movies such as Bowling for Columbine, Sicko, and perhaps his magnum opus, Fahrenheit 9/11. You know, this movie, Canadian Bacon, it was already bad as it was, but then when I found out Michael Moore was the guy who directed it, I mean, at the risk of sounding very anti-left, which honestly I'm not, but Michael Moore making this movie somehow just makes it feel even worse than it already is. Like, now that I know what the voice is behind this movie, fuck it, I'm not even finishing this movie. I actually paused this movie somewhere around the third act, like the beginning of the third act. I'm like, okay, I need to know who made this movie, because this is something right here. So I went and I looked, and Michael Moore, and it's like, nope, I'm done. I quit. I'm not doing this anymore. I quit. I'm done. So yeah, that's Canadian Bacon. I couldn't finish the movie because it was so bad. And then when I found out who was directing it, that only made it worse. Unfortunately, it's still a movie, so I kind of have to score it, which means I'm going to have to give it 1 hat out of 4. And that's going to do it for this week's edition of It Came from Pluto TV. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe, ring the bell, and check out some of my other videos, assuming I didn't piss you off with my political rhetoric, whatever it was. I'll see you next time.